This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Fast and Furious. I don't mean the movie. I'm talking about how things have played out so far in the second round of the NBA playoffs. It has been wild, to say the least. However, it has been entertaining and damn good television to watch if you are a basketball fan who loves the action that's taking place in both the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference. We'll get into all of that. Obviously, you know it's that time of the year where we continue our efforts to do a little autopsy in. So Shaw and myself, we can't wait to throw them jackets on. But before I do that, I got to make sure I roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw, a.k.a. Dr. Kill Patience, in the building. What's good, sir? How are you feeling about this second round of playoff action that's been taking place so far?
Good basketball all around. I mean, unfortunately for Denver, they up out of here, so we'll have to autopsy them at some point coming up in a couple of weeks. But I think the rest of these series are proving to be pretty good. Injuries are starting to mount up a little bit as well, too. I don't think Phoenix is as dominant as they've shown, but overall, like I said, I think it's good basketball, and I think we're heading for, like I said, new blood and some new excitement around the NBA.
So wait a minute, you don't think that from what you've seen so far, the sample size in the first two rounds with the Phoenix Suns, that they are not a sound enough basketball team yet, that whoever comes out between the Utah Jazz and the LA Clippers, you have more confidence that they would still be able to defeat them? Or do you think that the Phoenix Suns may have narrowed the gap a little bit by showing just how good they can probably be on both sides of the basketball?
No, they're very good. You know, I don't think they're 4-0 good against Denver. If that Denver team was healthy, I still would have picked Phoenix to win that series, but, you know, not 4-0. Even with Jamal Murray, so forth and so forth. So we'll see what ends up happening when they end up playing in the next round anyway, right? In the conference finals, see what that boils down to. So I think they have acquitted themselves tremendously well. Monty Williams and Devin Booker and Chris Paul, even DeAndre, and like everyone just is clicking. Everything's going well for them. So I'm just saying, I don't think they're this good. You know what I mean? They're what we thought the Nets probably could have been if the Nets had been healthy, in terms of just kind of running through things after especially dispatching the Lakers in 6. Now you run through the Denver Nuggets in 4, and they're resting. So it's a great time for them. And I'm just excited to see who they play next and how they will match up against that team.
Just turning our attention quickly over on the Eastern Conference, because you mentioned how injuries are playing such a critical role in the way that we're interpreting who may be coming out of either side of the conferences. Given what has taken place, you know, with the Sixers and Joel Embiid, and what we've seen now happen with Kyrie Irving and James Harden, I guess from my perspective, Shaw, is how much now more of an emphasis is it about the superstars that represent those respective teams stepping up and either taking advantage of some of these ill-fated things that have gone on against their opposing team, or more so about guys like KD and guys like Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris actually taking the mantle and basically saying, hey, man, like, this is our time to prove to people that we're not just the Robins for the Joel Embiids and for the Kevin Durant's of the world. Like, we got an opportunity here for us to step up and make things happen. And I speak of that, you know, with guys like Blake Griffin and Jeff Green and stuff like that, who they can very easily have their playoff hoops redemption if they step up and help elevate their respective teams against the opposition.
It's a star-driven league, and it will continue to be that. I mean, if these major players are not able to be there for their respective teams in the latter half of the playoffs here, then I don't know that they're necessarily built to make those types of adjustments in the playoffs, like not with that same level of intensity. And if they are, you know, then wow, you know, I'd be ultimately surprised. But I think when you suffer major injuries to those guys, those types of guys, your secondary and auxiliary parts are not equipped to be able to handle the playoff pressure in the way that you would need to continue to in advance. So I think we're seeing some good stuff from Philadelphia, even with Embiid. He's hurt, but he's playing through his injury, you know, with the small tear in the meniscus. And Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris and guys like that are stepping up and doing what they can to help. But it's a tie series as we record. And then on the other side, same thing in Brooklyn. You know, KD looks like Harden might be back, but what version of Harden do you really get? And I think if you're looking for Blake and Jeff Green to try to overtake the likes of Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton, with Milwaukee being relatively or mostly healthy with the exception of DiVincenzo, that seems like a tall order. So these teams were built the way they were because that's what their respective management thought would be the best case scenario for them to win. And the depth does matter, but when you're skimming off the top, and the top is that high, it's hard to just bounce back and say, okay, well, we can expect these teams to continue to go on the path that we might have thought they were going to before the injuries happened.
I'm really curious, Shaw, and obviously we got a jam-packed show for our listeners because we'll be doing autopsies on 2 specific teams, and I know a lot of people cannot wait for us to dig in on. But I'm really curious. So in the second round, who has really caught your eye? Like, who is the star of the second round, even though the second round is not completely done? And I'm not expecting you to, stand firm on this is the person. But up to this point, as we're recording this podcast, who has really stepped up and put the wow factor, you know what I'm saying, in your eye candy watching of what's been going on in the playoffs?
Well, it'd be hard pressed to not to talk about the Suns, who I didn't diss. I just said I don't think they're as dominant. But the one positive about them is that Booker's done it kind of a variety of different ways, and that's what I think has probably been the most impressive to me. When you need him to score 30 and 40, he's done it. When he's needed to maybe take a step back because his other guys had it going and he scores 18 to 20 and they can still win, he's done that as well too. So he's not caught up in kind of the sauce of I have to be the man. And I know when you're asking about overall performances, that's what most people would think. Okay, well, who's going on here and just, laid the wood to each team and each night and everything like that as well too. I think Booker's been able to pick his spots because his team is good. And to see a young guy not press in that way is it's awe-inspiring in a lot of ways. I just love to see that because he understands the game, and obviously the influence of Chris Paul and Monty Williams there is huge, but he's not trying to say, all right, well, I'm the man here and I need to assert myself in that way on every single night, to the detriment of his team, so to speak. So to me, I think that's been impressive as the Suns are sitting pretty, waiting for their conference opponent. Who you got, though, as a guy who might have impressed you in a way so far in the second round?
I know it's really going to surprise you, and I think who I'm going to mention ain't nobody talking about at all. I wouldn't expect them to, right? Because I'm just watching it from a completely different viewpoint. Seth Curry for the Philadelphia 76ers. And I said Seth, not Steph. But the way that Seth Curry's shooting the basketball, you would swear that he got a shot of Steph in him leading into not just the first round, but in the second round. And it's interesting because, Shaw, I think it brings a dynamic of what may play out if we're talking about the Philadelphia 76ers not only advancing, but also we're talking about who may be the key players in possibly getting them to an NBA Finals, right? Like, the way that he is shooting the basketball is just really impressive to me. And it's ironic because he's never going to be that go-to person, but I do think that he's going to be a go-to guy in the fourth quarter and maybe possibly when you need late shots. And that's something that Doc Rivers, I think, knowing now that Joel Embiid is not going to be 100%. He's going to be playing with a torn meniscus throughout. And I seriously think that his productivity as it wanes on in games is going to deteriorate. So who is Doc Rivers going to really lean on to? Is he going to lean on to Ben Simmons? Ben Simmons has not proven to me that he wants it in the fourth quarter. He has his moments, but he still looks like he's somebody who wants to facilitate for everybody else to get off. Tobias Harris, again, doesn't seem to be the aggressive type. The only person that I really feel like wants it, probably as bad as maybe like Shake Milton, which I don't think Doc is going to be handing him the rock like that, is Seth Curry to shoot those shots. And the fact that he's been making those shots and probably averaging like 15, 16 points per game. I mean, this kid is an afterthought when it comes to the Curry family tree of scoring the basketball. But when he gets into the playoffs, and he showed us this when he was playing for Dallas last year, he is the type of person where if you give him the ball and you give him the opportunity, he's going to make shots. And I think that's going to be critical for the Philadelphia 76ers to figure out a way to get past the Atlanta Hawks if you're not going to have a 100% healthy Joel Embiid.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned him because I think I was watching the game the other night and, he did some dribble move basically, where he was able to pull it back and use a hesitation dribble and kind of wet his defender. And I was like, wow, he's not just a slot up dude, right? He's somebody who's worked on his game to be to contribute in all forms and fashions offensively. So as his offense continues to expand, it just makes him more of a threat and a better outlet for Embiid when he's doubled and maybe even sometimes triple teamed. And having the confidence that a guy like Curry is out there with an expanding game to knock that down is definitely a luxury that the Sixers have going through the course of the playoffs.
Absolutely. All right, so enough of us teasing you with the playoffs. You want some, go watch some, right? The NBA playoffs is still obviously happening, but we would certainly encourage you guys to definitely check out the remaining teams that are participating in the second round. The action is hot and heavy. Obviously, the Sixers and the Atlanta Hawks are tied up in the series as we're recording. The Clippers and the Jazz are tied up in the series as we're recording. So definitely there's going to be games to be played in this second round before we even start talking about conference finals. And then obviously, you know, we got one team that's critical with the Brooklyn Nets and with the Milwaukee Bucks. So great action to be had in this second round. Don't miss it out. Definitely go check it out. You know the channels. You can go either to ESPN or TNT for you to be able, or ABC, for you to be able to catch all of this NBA action. It's hot and heavy. All right, so coming up, Sean and I are going to be digging in, doing our coveted autopsy reports. We got two teams that we're putting on the slab. We will be talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and the Miami Heat. Dr. Kill Patience and your boy Game Face Lee, we're ready to put in that work. Shop is open to be cutting up on them bodies. So hang in with us. You know how we do. As always, get at my man Shaw, Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at Game Face Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Just look for the Baseline NBA podcast and allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. If you want to catch this episode and also previous episodes, especially some of the autopsies that we have already been doing, be sure to go to www.thebaselinenba.com. That is the home. That is the spot. Also, be sure to check out The Baseline, as we will be featured on a very, very up-and-coming hot media group. You don't want to miss it. If you're not sure about where it's coming from, you need to check our Twitter handle. We will be on point with it. It is lovely. I say splendid. Shout-outs to our peoples. We're not naming no names just yet. It'll happen very soon enough. But we definitely want you to check us out and our family. So be on the lookout for all of the information being thrown out on the Twitter and social media spaces this week. The Baseline is running hard with a crew, and you definitely want to check us and the family out. All right, let's get it started. You know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's do a little autopsy here on The Breakdown. Time to break it down.
Break it down to the bone gristle.
My team is dead! They knew we were coming, man. They knew we were coming. They're dead! They're all dead!
Time now for the autopsy report. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, Game Face Lee, Dr. Kill Patience. And we got two teams that we are putting on the slab. The first team that we will have conversations on, that we will properly eulogize, will be the Miami Heat. Miami Heat is a team that really had a roller coaster type season. And I know my man Shaw is like a staunch stickler to have to go in on Heat fans, because, you know, at times he questions the credibility of Heat fans really being Heat fans and the Miami Heat in general as a basketball organization. But over the last couple of years, my man has been solid. He's dialed it back a little bit. Sees that there is obviously something that has blossomed in the professionalism and really the organization in general to legitimize the fact that it's not a fluke. The Miami Heat are a solid basketball team. With that being said, this season really had us kind of scratching our heads, because while we were trying to believe into the fact that last year could have been just them overachieving, this season kind of brought us down to earth about, is it that all of the other teams really got that much better? Or did the Miami Heat just have too much happen in this season that they just couldn't catch up to put themselves on the right footing to settle themselves the same way that they did last year to get to the NBA Finals? So with that being said, Shaw, a 40-32 season with the Miami Heat, you think to yourself, that's pretty good, that's pretty decent, right? Because if it's a shortened season and stuff. But nothing when you look at the numbers, nothing when you look at the metrics, and even the way that they just got ousted in the first round gave you the impression that if we had to run this back come next year with the same horses, that you have confidence that this is a team that would outright be a top 3, top 5 team in the Eastern Conference.
It reminds me of a hip hop line. I don't remember. I think it's a Jay-Z line. No, don't do that. Don't run this back. Don't do that. This team is not ready to compete at the same level that they were in the bubble. It's not the same cast. It's not the same mix of energy, and they know that. And that's why I think they hedged their bets a little. Well, no, that's the wrong terminology. They played it smart, really, by signing a lot of their players to 2-year deals with team options in the second year, which that will expire in the summer to set themselves up. They're like, all right, well, they didn't want to break up a team that went to the NBA Finals and just say, all right, well, we know it was luck or whatever the case may be. They're like, well, let's see what we have. And now they know what they have. And it's a team that is middle of the pack in the Eastern Conference and not ready to compete at the high level that they showed in the bubble. And it's fine that we were all maybe a little fooled by their success and bought into the whole Heat culture mantra. But this team really struggled offensively, and that was kind of a big surprise. They were, I think, 7th on offense and 7th in defense last year, but they dropped from 7th in offense to 18th this year, and they remained 7th in defense. So it was their offensive struggles and incapabilities that really did them in throughout the majority of the year, in addition to, the broken record conversation, COVID and injuries and changing lineups and so forth and so forth. But they just don't have it. And now they're set up to make a very big run at whoever might become available. And, Pat Riley's going to swing for the fences here, but this is not a team that can feel really good about how they close out their season.
I agree with you on every aspect of where you're coming from. But I guess for me, I just want to keep it even on the simplest of terms. Nobody really, I don't know. It just felt like none of those guys really believed that they were as good as they were the year before. At least maybe they did, like, within the moment of the bubble, Shaw. But going into this season, and I don't know, maybe they got caught up in seeing all of these moves that were being made, and maybe they were thinking to themselves, like, hey, is Miami going to try and do something like that or whatever? I don't know, but I just didn't see or feel that same kind of confidence in their main players, in Jimmy Butler or Bam Adebayo. Now, by all accounts, Adebayo and Butler played decent. But there was nothing that's really preventing those guys from playing at another level, elevating the Heat yet again to another level. I thought that because of all those moves that took place, that they would take it personally, right? That, hey, nobody respects us and we're going to come out, we're going to punch the other teams in the mouth. Right? Maybe with the exception of the Brooklyn Nets. But they struggle across the board with all teams. They struggle with the Boston Celtics, for Christ's sake. You know what I'm saying? Like, it befuddles me, because even if you look at this roster, and I get it, this roster is not as talented a roster, say, as the Atlanta Hawks, okay? They still had playoff they still had, I guess what you could say is playoff stamina in them, right? Like, they survived. They went in there and they literally got to the precipice, right? They got to the top, and they just weren't good enough to beat the Los Angeles Lakers. It's just weird to me that when we're talking about the Miami Heat and you got two premier players like Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, in less than a year, we're shooting them down to a point where no matter what you put next to that roster, it would have to be that much exponentially great to re-elevate themselves into the conversation. Usually, if you say, okay, the Milwaukee Bucks is struggling, right? You don't say that about Giannis, and you wouldn't have said that about Chris Middleton to such an extent. When they got Drew Holiday, you knew Drew Holiday isn't going to be better than Giannis. You knew Drew Holiday wasn't going to probably be better than Chris Middleton because of the upside that you see from those two guys. But what are you going to actually get if you're the Miami Heat when you can see that your two superstar players in Butler and Adebayo were just stagnant this whole season and weren't even good enough to at least get a game against the Milwaukee Bucks in that first round?
Yeah, I mean, that's hard for me to swallow in some ways, because I think Butler, when he came back from his injury or COVID or whatever it was, he was very good and started to enter and scratch the surface of the MVP conversation. But the talent around him was probably not as up to par as again, we would have hoped and would have liked to see for this team. So they struggle, like I said, offensively. People called for Bam Adebayo to be more offensively inclined, especially in the playoffs too, as you kind of alluded to. So I think Bam took a step back, and as much as we all like, he's a NBA Twitter favorite amongst most people, right? But he didn't have an exceptional year. Like, that just wasn't what it was. Like, especially with the growth that we thought he was about to take. I think Butler did what he could, but with Tyler Herro taking a major step back, when all the stuff, we talked about this on Just Three with Joe, not too long ago, rather, that Herro might have got caught up in been a victim of his own fame and getting Chipotle bowls and getting a, IG model girlfriend and all these things. It didn't translate to success on the court for him in the way that many thought it would. And Dragic was in and out of the lineup as well. So to me, Spoelstra didn't have a consistent lineup. Butler was still by far and away clearly the best player, but not even having him for good portions and chunks of the season, that allowed a lot of inconsistency. And with Herro taking the aggression that he did, Duncan Robinson even took a step back as well. It just wasn't Miami Heat basketball that we saw, entering the bubble and finishing out the bubble, even in a loss to the Lakers in the finals. So I think they are going to reassess this thing. And as I alluded to, set themselves up perfectly. They can let go Iguodala and that $15 million he's owed. They can let go Goran Dragic and the nearly $20 million he's owed and free up a lot of cap space to try to figure out, okay, what is our potential next move? Even getting Victor Oladipo for basically literally like a bag of chips, and Olynyk ended up going to Houston doing a lot of great things. So, shouts to Kelly Olynyk for bucking up and doing what he needed to do. But now they own Oladipo's bird rights, right? So they can re-sign him to a team-friendly deal. I'm sure Oladipo still wants to, back up the Brinks truck, as IT would say. But he was hurt. So they have his bird rights now, so they could try to potentially use him in a sign-and trade, or they can keep him and see if they can build on this roster with him, and then letting go some of that excess salary that they don't need. Ariza was a one-year deal, so he's off the books. Bielitsa, they acquired him. He's off the books as well, too. Even the return of Udonis Haslem. The biggest question, I think, for them is, what do you pay Duncan Robinson? Because we've been talking about this a lot in the months leading preceding this. If Joe Harris got what Joe Harris got in Brooklyn, Duncan Robinson has got to be very close to that, or would be looking for numbers close to that. And can they keep his ego in check, to give them a team-friendly deal that makes sense for them, and that they can continue to try to make some other moves on the edges as well too. Those are the questions that I'm concerned with. And, I actually kind of want to start there. I know I said a lot, but what do you think the Heat should do with Duncan Robinson? Should they be giving him $18, $19, $20 million a year? Or, where do you think that lands?
Well, I guess it just depends on where the Miami Heat really fall in the prioritization about being a three and deep type team, right? Like, so this is a team, Shaw, that finished, 11th in 3 points. I'm sorry, they finished 14th in 3-point shots, and then they finished 11th in 3-point attempts. All right, they were 20th in 3-point field goal percentage. So I don't know if whether or not the Miami Heat are fully vested in the idea that they want to be shooting the three ball as much as other teams clearly are doing right now, right? You can clearly see that. What doesn't help, though, is that this team finishes in the bottom in 2-point field goal attempts, which scares me, because if Bam Adebayo is somebody that you're asking to be more offensively, I guess, involved, where's his offense going to be involved in? Scoring the basketball below the circle, or him shooting threes, right? Then it goes back to the very question that you just asked, Shaw. Do you pony up the money to have Duncan Robinson essentially captain your 3-point strategy, essentially? Because that's what it comes down to. It ain't about freeing up for Jimmy Butler to get 3-point shots. Jimmy Butler's going to shoot what he shoots, right? Tyler Herro, what, you think he's going to shoot the 3-ball consistently and better if he's taking a step back? You think that Spoelstra is going to rely on him for those open looks and open shots? He's got to get down in the paint. He's got to draw fouls, right? He's the person that's got to make plays on ISOs. So who's the other person that's left? Duncan Robinson. But guess what? You've already assumed 3/5 of your starting roster on the idea that they may or may not be infatuated with the 3-ball. So is it really worth the money that Duncan Robinson may be demanding for a team that I don't think is fully committed in shooting the three ball strategically the same way that other teams are set up to do right now, not just in the Eastern Conference. You could just look at it just from the teams that are still participating in the Eastern Conference playoffs, right? Like the Miami Heat would be the worst of those teams that would have been remaining had they not gotten swept out by the Milwaukee Bucks. Me personally, I wouldn't pony up that money. Not unless Eric Spoelstra is going to reimagine the way that they're going to shoot the three and how they're going to give Robinson more opportunities to be able to shoot that three. And to me, it's a tough sell because your captain, the guy who's going to handle that ball, is going to always pretty much be Jimmy Butler, right? And then who's the next person handling it? Tyler Hero. And I'm sorry, I'm not seeing where those guys are going to be captaining and ushering this new era of Miami Heat basketball where they're just jacking up threes all over the place. They're just not built like that. So I don't know if whether or not the priority should be the focus on paying Duncan Robinson that kind of money unless you're going to situate him to get those kind of looks that warrant the amount of money you're going to be paying him.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You really have to figure out what the next iteration of your offense and culture is going to be. If you're going to keep some of those pieces on the edge, like if you compare Duncan Robinson to Joe Harris, well, Joe Harris is an amazing luxury to have when you have Kyrie, KD, and then, they didn't even know they were going to get Harden when they signed Harris, but they have him as well too. And now that Joe Harris is the release valve when defenses are focusing in on those guys who are just absolute killers at all three levels, right? Like they can get in, they can get downhill, they can shoot the mid range, they can shoot the three, all got handles.
Can I add something real quick to that point, Shaw? Remember, like even when you watch the Brooklyn Nets play, Joe Harris is actually driving to the basket now too. Right? Like, I'm not saying that is his MO. He knows why he's out there on the court. But what helps is Kevin Durant shooting the three, Kyrie Irving shooting the three. Those guys are willingly wanting to shoot those threes. You don't get that sense when Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo is on the floor. And even if you gave it to Trevor Ariza, Trevor Ariza has to get set up to shoot that basketball. Andre Iguodala has to get set up to shoot that basketball. So now you're left with Duncan Robinson, who's a person who has to be set up to shoot that basketball. Are you really going to invest that kind of strategy in doing so if you're the Miami Heat? And right now, I don't see that from Eric Spoelstra or Pat Riley.
Right. So they again, like I said, they have some decisions to make. Obviously, Butler is a good passer, but I don't think you want him being your primary ball handler in an offense and having to do that on a regular basis. Adebayo, same thing, is a very good passer, but you don't, unless you think he's going to be Jokic level, you're not necessarily trying to run the offense through him on a regular basis. What probably needs to happen is Adebayo or Precious Achiuwa. One of those guys need to be able to expand their game a little bit out to the three-point line, because I think Butler's probably too far gone where he's going to shoot the three on a regular basis. So the progression: corner threes, wing threes, straight away. Then you kind of have like the overall package. So one of those guys probably need to add like the corner three to their persona in the offseason here to kind of try to make things a little bit better offensively for them. Because if Adebayo becomes at least that level of a threat, then that's great. I mean, right now he's a decent threat off the dribble for people guarding him his size. At the mid range, he can shoot the elbow jumper, and he can even shoot it with some defense in his face as well too. But he doesn't have that confidence out to three, and I think that's where you look at trying to potentially get a primary playmaker here to join this roster. Don't know who that is. Of course, they're going to sniff around the Damian Lillard stuff if he does actually become available. All their plans for Giannis got thwarted, even though Giannis is obviously not a point guard. But they had big plans of trying to make a big splash. There's stuff going on around down here. I'm sure they're pretty pissed that the Clippers were able to kind of right their shit, because they're hoping that would go to hell so that they can maybe take a swing at Kawhi, and maybe they still can. But I don't know that it's there for them, this offseason to try to make a really big move. I know they'll try, but it is interesting. And I think what might ultimately happen is they come to agreement where they probably would bring Dragic back. I don't know about Iguodala, because maybe you try to swap solids with Iguodala and Duncan Robinson. Maybe you keep Duncan Robinson around at 14-15. And then you maybe let Iguodala go, and then maybe you see what you can do with Oladipo, and that situation do alongside Butler and Adebayo. So, and then you hope you keep your fingers crossed that Hero becomes the player that everybody thought he was, that you couldn't trade James Harden for, right? Like you couldn't trade Hero to get James Harden. And as crazy as that sounds, well, now you've bet big on Hero, so he has to come and he has to get it done. And I think that's where Miami's at right now. They hope that they can get some young talent to develop from within, while they'll obviously take some big swings in free agency and potential trades. But I don't think a lot is going to be out there for them in that route.
It's funny, Shaw. Like we often talk about, like the certain moves that you do make and don't make can pretty much make or break you for the next 3 to 5 years. And I can't believe that in a way we might be talking about the Miami Heat if the intent or is the idea that they are sniffing in the water to try and make big moves from free agent perspective and stuff like that, that we could possibly be talking about them in the same light that we talk about the New York Knicks, right? Like, I think that this was actually a good thing that this happened to Miami, because if their next move was to go big free agency wise, they could be setting themselves up for crazy disappointment, right? Because clearly you can see that the talent that they have is not nearly ready. Also, even if the intent is that you're trying to move some pieces, you're trying to, throw some guys out there, who is going to take these guys, right? Hero, unproven. None, unproven, right? Like, it could be the worst opportunity, but it actually could be the best opportunity, because I think now the onus is really on the Miami Heat getting these guys up to true speed. Like, maybe last year wasn't true admiration, right? The only way we're going to be able to see is what these guys do in year 3 now, right? And so you don't have to worry about Adebayo, but none of those, but Adebayo's off limits. There ain't no way in hell you're going to trade this dude, to get something that you weren't able to get from last year. And even if, let's say, for example, the intent was to get a guy like James Harden. James Harden is not going to be the person that puts you over the top to win you a championship. He may get you to the Eastern Conference Finals, but if all things still played out where James Harden didn't wind up going to the Brooklyn Nets still had Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, and then you could have still made the argument they would have made a play for Blake Griffin and a whole host. They still had LaMarcus Aldridge before LaMarcus Aldridge had to retire. I'm just saying that, like, the Miami Heat have to be very careful in not doing what I think a lot of people hate seeing the Miami Heat do, which is assume that they can buy themselves a way to a championship. And if they don't have the talent to get themselves in a position to even barter for that, then they have to refocus their energies, to your point, on coaching up the talent that they do have and putting them back in a position where they were competing like they did last year.
Yeah, well, a lot is riding on this. I think Pat Riley's last run, Pat Riley's like in the 70s or something like that too. So he's not necessarily planning for 4 and 5 years out. Like, he's trying to get this done like ASAP. And I think Spoelstra, same thing too. He's not at the stage where he wants to be in a rebuilding situation. So they have a mid-tier team that is probably 2 pieces away from being an elite level team if you believe in some of the peripheral parts. Now, again, some of those peripheral parts you might need to trade to get to where you ultimately need to get to, i.e. Tyler Hero. Maybe there's some interest around Kendrick Nunn. But I think right now Hero's stock is really low. It's not what it was going into this offseason, or coming into the season, I should say, rather. And then I think now they're just going to have to like completely reassess who they are, what they want to do, and how their offense is going to be structured. Because I think the defensive principles will always be there, especially with Spoelstra as their coach. But they got to find a way to be more efficient offensively and maybe capture some of that magic that they showed last year with the 3-ball.
Yeah, and they got to pick that pace up as well, too. They were like nearly at the bottom with pace. Like, come on. They got to.
They need some size. Yeah. They have no bigs, really. Yeah. So they need some size, too.
Yeah, that as well. And Victor Oladipo is not going to fix that. Whatever rendition of Victor Oladipo comes to Miami, to me, it's really going to be more of a tryout. It's going to be a question of whether he can keep up with what Miami is trying to do, whether it be too slow or too fast. That's the reason why it's just interesting to see, like, where they're going to go with this with regards to Oladipo. Because now when you really look at the dynamic of this basketball team, I'm struggling to figure out where Oladipo kind of fits in. Oladipo has been the kind of person who's kind of sat back for so long and, has been snuffed, right? He's the reason why the Magic couldn't move any further. He's the reason why, Russell Westbrook, things weren't the way that we thought they were going to be in OKC, even though Oladipo was really the great a great teammate for Russell Westbrook, right? Probably his growth process accelerated so much playing next to Westbrook than 3-4 years that he was doing over there in Orlando. And then he goes into Indiana, and this was his first opportunity for him to be a front runner, right? To lead a team. And then health just could not keep him on the court long enough for us to be able to see that come to fruition. Gets bounced around a couple of teams, and now he's in Miami, and guess where he winds up being right now, right? He can either be second fiddle to Jimmy Butler, or he may actually be somebody important enough that Jimmy Butler may try and lean on, but will never be good enough to be better than what Jimmy Butler has established, him being the new Dwayne Wade for the Miami Heat.
Yeah, Oladipo's 29, Butler's 31. So it's not like, if Oladipo's like 25, he's like, all right, whatever. You know what I mean? He's kind of leading the next era of Heat basketball potentially. But at 29, coming off the multiple injuries, it's hard for them to kind of invest in that. So I'm really interested in that decision. I think their two biggest things are Oladipo and Duncan Robinson, and then obviously what they do with guys like Dragic and Iguodala as well too.
All right. Well, properly eulogize Shaw. We can put this one, zip up the body bag on the Miami Heat. This is a team that clearly we have to keep our eyes on for this upcoming season. More importantly, this off season. Some moves definitely are going to have to be made. They're not going to be able to sit idly by and allow the Southeastern Division to just, wash away for them to just step right back in those and fill those shoes. Clearly, there are teams that are on the come up. They're certainly gunning for them and ready to take their spot. So it will be interesting to see what moves Pat Riley makes and how Eric Spoelstra navigates them to be the successful basketball team they were a year ago. Coming up, Sean and I are going to be talking about a team that I don't think we were expecting to discuss this early as far as autopsies go, but we're feeling it nonetheless. We'll be talking about the Los Angeles Lakers and what they're going to need to do in this upcoming offseason in order to position themselves to be right back in the thick of things for this next season. You hear about that more on The Baseline. This is The Baseline. Cal Lee Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. We are back with the Autopsy Report. Time to talk about team number 2 on the autopsy. Shaw about to pull out the slab on him. Got the body opened up. Let's start dissecting the Los Angeles Lakers. That's right, I said it. The L.A. Lakers, the former NBA champions. And listen, for anybody to not throw out there and say, oh, you can't make any excuses because, everybody has injuries. Come on. I mean, this team was ravaged with injuries, okay? They were a team that was top 3, and as soon as LeBron James goes down, as soon as you find out that Anthony Davis is not 100%, and then you really had to look at the roster that Pelinka put together and that Frank Vogel, basically had to work with, you were just at least praying that they would be good enough to at least make the play-in tournament with the way things were trending. And quickly, how a lot of that deteriorated from being a top 3 basketball team to a team that almost didn't get in to participate. It's kind of sad, when you really think about it, but at the same time, it's eye-opening and just really tells you, Shaw, about how rapid things can change when it comes to teams smelling blood in the water. And that's exactly what they saw. Even though they won the title last year, a lot of teams came out feeling like this team is not as invincible as everybody's making them out to be, because something is bound to happen with the Los Angeles Lakers, and it always seems to be they roll the dice on everything of what they currently have. They don't have a contingency plan, and it wore itself out in this particular season with the way that they struggled in the second half.
Yeah, I love what you said there, and we talked about this kind of ad nauseum over the course of the season. Teams in the West were shooting their proverbial shot. They did not look at a Lakers team and say, oh, no, not us. We got to wait a year. It wasn't like that defeatist attitude like when the Warriors were doing what the Warriors doing, with their run, especially with as fragile as Anthony Davis is. And it's not a knock. He's fragile. I mean, that's what it is. So unfortunately for the Lakers, they were not able to build the chemistry that they wanted to get, despite all the myriad of moves that Rob Pelinka made. And, everyone heaped executive of the year award on him before the season started, including us here on the Baseline. But it didn't work out. The injuries mounted up. Vogel now is catching some fire as well, too. He didn't really catch the praise, getting them to the NBA championship, but he's definitely catching some fire now for their first round exit here. But they have a lot of decisions to make, just as the Miami Heat do, right? Obviously, LeBron and AD aren't going anywhere, but Schroeder, who turned down, I think it was worth a $70 million extension. Can he get that? Can he recoup that? Does he want to be there? Magic Johnson comes out and tweets and says Schroeder doesn't project as a Laker long term. So does that something that one of the Laker all-time greats saying that about you, does that rub Schroeder the wrong way? And does he's like, I will take my talents elsewhere, and leave this franchise?
Can we rub Dennis Schroeder the right way? Okay, let's seriously.
He's a prickly dude.
Let's Johnny Gill his ass right quick. Okay, where is it that Dennis Schroeder? Look, we'll give props when props is due, and we will call you out when we see BS. All right, Dennis Schroeder, by all accounts, is a decent guard. But I don't know what is going on with them. He done went from Johnny Trezvant to Johnny Gill.
Johnny Gill.
Yeah.
Ralph Trezvant and Johnny Gill.
To Johnny Gill, right. You know what I'm saying? To Michael Bivins, where he just think he can just franchise himself, right? And just claim that he is worth a lot more than he thinks he's worth. Look, man. When you're supposed to be that third, like everybody looked at the Los Angeles Lakers and felt like as long as you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, you're at least getting to a finals and you're likely getting to a championship. That's all well and good. And we can sit here and argue back and forth with all of the Lakerites, you know what I'm saying, the Lakeonians, about, whether or not this was a good team. This team would have only been good if Dennis Schroeder had actually stepped up and played like a person that needed to be the third wheel like LeBron had when he was in Miami and he was playing next to Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. Schroeder needed to be that Chris Bosh. Show me where Dennis Schroeder truly acted and played that way consistently, where you felt confident about that when they got into the playoffs. That never happened. He was more an antagonist than a protagonist, right? And so that to me is the byline that I feel when everybody's talking about whether or not Dennis Schroeder should, roll the dice and bet on himself. I'm like, I don't know what you're betting on, bro, but ain't nobody feeling your money line right now. And he proved that in how ineffective he was for the Lakers, even in that first round against the Phoenix Suns. He got toasted. He got toasted by a one-armed Chris Paul and a hungry Devin Booker. And the only thing that he could do is just chastise and go at the refs and, throw up his shoulders with the, I don't know what they did type nonsense. Dennis Schroeder needed to step up. Like, sometimes it amazes me how some players, when they're in that space, they don't recognize the moment when it's there for them, where they could potentially actually give themselves opportunity to shine. And in that moment, even if the Lakers were not capable of beating the Phoenix Suns, you should not get lambasted the way that he was being lambasted by the Phoenix backcourt. That to me is indicative of Dennis Schroeder not understanding the gravitas of the moment for not just the team, but himself and his future as a starting guard moving forward. Right now, he's as good as he's going to be as a sixth-man role player. But don't talk about paying this man more than $70 million for him to be starting for some basketball team, because I don't see it from what I saw just this past season and just the shenanigans that he kind of does in and out. He hides behind it because he plays with other good players. But when you have to actually have him on an island to actually do for the team, and we saw this in Atlanta, we just don't talk about it. But we saw this in Atlanta, that's what they were waiting for, which is why they made him expendable. And we're seeing it again with him being a Los Angeles Laker.
I didn't know Dennis Schroeder touched a nerve like that. I mean, that was quite the soliloquy there, sir. I think you hit the nail on the head there with Schroeder. He's probably more like Ralph Trezvant, where he's Mr. Sensitivity, right? He thinks he's a lot better than he is, and at the end of the day, he came off 2 magnificent seasons in OKC. He played the role. And when he got there, that's where I was the most concerned. I was like, there's no way this dude is going there and going to accept, this role where he's not the man and not handling the ball on a regular basis. And I was wrong. Like, he had put in, basically 2 6-man of the year type seasons over there in OKC. So shouts to him, but got to LA and immediately was like, I'm done with that coming out the bench stuff. And that was probably their first indicator, right? So yeah, in the playoffs, 14 a game, only 2.8 assists. Yuck. 40% from the floor, yuck. 30% from the three-point line, double yuck. And I think he's found his way up out of LA. And there'll be teams out there that will want to take him on, because I don't think they'll look at it as some sort of a reclamation project. But it's not something that it seems like the Lakers may want to bring him back. The question here really now is they have a lot of free agents, bro. Like, I didn't realize it was as interesting as it was, kind of even going into it. Harrell, do you think he's happy with his role? This guy didn't even get off the bench the last couple of games, and elimination stuff with Anthony Davis not playing. He didn't even get off the bench with AD not playing. Like, what's happening? And he's the guy who won Sixth Man of the Year the season before that. So I think he'd probably want to opt out of that $9.7 million that he's owed next year and see if he can go somewhere else where he might get a little bit of love and not be benched. When number one, when it's crunch time, but number two, when guys like the number one guy ahead of him is out. So he just got thrown to the wolves, so to speak. Wesley Matthews, that was a 1-year deal. Caruso is up for an extension. Markieff Morris is up for an extension. Taylor Horton-Tucker, who they didn't quote unquote want to move in a Kyle Lowry move, now is up for an extension. Andre Drummond, who you brought mid-season, what are you doing there? The Lakers have a zillion and one questions, and I think everyone just assumes it'll be all right because Pelinka has shown some level of competency here. But I'm a little bit more worried, not necessarily sounding the alarm, but I am definitely concerned and sitting there with my people's eyebrow up like, what y'all doing over there? How are you going to make this work? Because I don't think it's as sweet as it is just because you have LeBron and AD. Well,
I agree with you definitely on many of the points that you were just making. What's interesting to me, Shaw, is Frank Vogel did exactly what he was asked to do, which is to improve this team defensively to a point where they have a balance of offense and defense. And what's interesting, Shaw, is if you're going to tell me that by losing Anthony Davis, you absolutely have eradicated all of your defensive principles to be a more defensively sound basketball team, then you're probably right. Then Frank Vogel really should own the fact that this team failed in being able to at least be a good or sound basketball team defensively. What he cannot, miraculously make happen is find you another Anthony Davis with the roster that was given to him, knowing that none of these guys scored a basketball like Anthony Davis, create mismatch problems like Anthony Davis, right? So now you're left with LeBron James. And ultimately, it's LeBron James's responsibility to put these guys in the best opportunity to score the basketball. And unfortunately, he couldn't do that. Not because he's, Father Time is catching up with him. Maybe you could probably attribute that a little bit. But if you really think about it, this is not the roster that you have asked LeBron James to, to turn water into wine with, okay? Like, guys have actually taken a step back. Maybe because they're riding the coattails of what LeBron James and Anthony Davis are giving you, or maybe those two guys are so focused on handling theirs that they're just like, we'll deal with whatever we deal with later on. It's just amazing to me that this team defensively was as bad as they were in the second half of the season. Like, it suddenly just became like we lost Anthony Davis, therefore we suddenly forgot how to play defense. This team was not good defensively, Shaw. So you're not even giving yourself a chance. Even if you're struggling to score the basketball, you're not even giving yourself a chance on what got you the championship was the fact that you played good defense. And this team, now when you look at them, they're not constructed to play good defense moving forward. No matter what Frank Vogel instills in those guys, he could brainwash them. And they're not going to go out there and play the kind of defense that he wants them to go out there and play defense on. Because these guys are really more offensive-minded dudes. He was only able to kind of harness that for a shortened period of time. This kind of team defensively is not able to sustain something for a regular season going into the playoffs. Unless you're miraculously going to get something out of Kyle Kuzma that's going to change. Unless you miraculously get something out of Dennis Schroeder that's going to change. And a lot of these guys are already taking steps back. Father Time catching up with them with KCP and Wesley Matthews. And look, Ben McLemore, come on. Ben McLemore shoots the basketball, but you can't leave him on the floor because he can't defend anybody. So this is a tough sell. And Pelinka, he rolled the dice thinking he could get maybe squeeze 2. He's happy he's got 1, but now he's got a massive overhaul if this team is going to be able to compete in the Western Conference moving forward, even with LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
Yeah, I was listening to another show as I often do, and I think somebody was saying, it was like, well, the Lakers still be good. It's like probably the window for them to have a multi-championship run is probably like that's probably not what we're going to see, and they'll be good and they'll have something to say in there as long LeBron is can continue to try to defy Father Time. But them as a legitimate, hey, they're going to win the championship. It's hard to see that right now as currently constructed. Again, as I said on a previous show, there's nothing they can do really now is going to really, get me to be like, oh, wow, I'm excited about them and get me really be impressed about them. Short-sighted of getting Damian Lillard on this team, as I said before. And I think a lot of what has to happen now is, what do you believe in the roster? Kuzma's up for a potential trade. Like they realize maybe he's not as good or not the pieces that they want to have around LeBron and AD long term. And I use that term with LeBron air quotes because obviously he's going to be 37 going into next season. The next thing is too was what do you do with Andre Drummond? As we were recording here, ironically, I got a notification of an Andre Drummond post on IG where a fan tweeted at him or messaged him and saying, "Hey, bro, sign that veteran minimum. Try to run it back." And he said, "You're drunk." He's not taking no veteran minimum. He's 27 years old, still in the prime of his career. And while a lot of people feel his stats are empty calories, he doesn't feel that way. And hey, if he can go out there and give you in 2020 on a bad team, he's like, well, I should be able to get paid for that. It didn't work out for him, much like DeMarcus Cousins moving around and things of that nature. These bigs trying to chase rings, it hasn't really worked out in recent years, unfortunately. But if they don't bring Drummond back, which I don't necessarily think they should.
They shouldn't. Yeah, there's no way they should.
They don't do that. They don't bring Harrell back, or Harrell just chooses not to come back. Rather, they don't bring Schroeder back. They'll have money, but again, it's like, what can you do? They don't have the draft equity to offer because of the Anthony Davis trade. So they'd have to get extremely, extremely creative in trying to figure out some sort of cap gymnastics here to get something done, or if they were trying to get into a Lillard conversation or Bradley Beal conversation or whoever that might become available in the off season or as the draft approaches. But it doesn't look like there's a direct path for them right now. But again, they'll always have a chance to be competitive as long as LeBron and AD can be healthy. And I think that is kind of like the caveat here to all of this, because no matter what you do, if one of those two guys end up not being healthy, then you're still kind of looking at probably a first round exit if you can't really maintain that level of competence and integrity within your starting lineup.
Well, let me ask you this question, Shaw, because I'm looking at a guy like Kyle Kuzma, and I'm really saying to myself, like, if you're the Los Angeles Lakers, if you're Lakers fans and things of that nature, you were enamored with what Kyle Kuzma kind of gave you in the early part of his career. And it's not like he has a really long career anyway, right? Like it's only been like 4 seasons, right? My thing is, what exactly is it that he's going to do for you that you're actually looking for right now, right? Like I often said to myself that part of the reason why the Los Angeles Lakers could not even maintain was that they didn't have anybody to create those same mismatch problems that the guys that you already have on your roster, LeBron James and Anthony Davis, was going to give you, once they go down or once they come off the court, right? Like Kyle Kuzma, to me, is a heady player with a lot of energy, but nothing that kind of equates to what the Lakers truly need when it comes to this version of themselves competing, not just in the playoffs, but even just through the regular season. I mean, the guy only averaged 13 points per game. I think points are overblown, okay? For a guy who's in a system like what Frank Vogel has developed, scoring points to me means nothing when you're a liability defensively, right? And obviously that means that Frank Vogel can't lean on you unless it's a necessity because your roster is completely ravaged with injuries, that he's got to put you out there on the court. If it were probably up to me thinking, the way I see how things played out with Kuzma, I don't think Vogel plays Kuzma nearly as much as he's forced to have to play him or depend on him so. Not because it's a question that he doesn't like him, it's just he doesn't fit in what Vogel wants to do. And there's not much that you can do about it. There's not a whole lot of wiggle room that you can get around that part of it. So my thinking is this with this situation, Shaw, is Kyle Kuzma to me is a good piece for another basketball team. Somebody is going to pony up something for a guy like a Kyle Kuzma to be on their roster. He could actually be an upgrade at the 3-4 position for a couple of teams that may have been, kind of hanging around on the outside looking in, trying to get into the play-in situation, right? Or a team that's on the lower tier could have certainly used that kind of upgrade at the 4 spot to compete. Do you see that the Lakers are going to try and move this kid while he is young and ready available for some teams that truly need his skill set?
Yeah, I think they are going to try to move him. The question is, he doesn't project as like an integral piece. He's a good player. He can be a good player on a bad team. I don't think he's a good player on a championship level team. And while he showed some signs in the bubble, and especially when he kind of locked in defensively, I don't know that he's built that way to sustain that level. And I have a kind of return question to you. And I think as you were talking, it came to me. So who do you think has had the biggest drop off? Now they're years apart now. Hero's only in his second year, and Kuzma just finished his 4th year, right? But what Kuzma was from year 1 to maybe even now, and Hero was from year 1 to now, who do you think's drop off was probably more dramatic? And in terms of even what the perception of the trade value might be for either one of those guys, like who would you rather have? I know Hero's obviously a little bit younger, but again, just thinking about how they came out in their first seasons firing, and everyone was like, "Oh no, we can't move this guy for that guy. We got to keep what we got to hold on. He's the future." Blah 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 blah. I don't think either one of the Heat or the Lakers feel that way right now. Maybe the Heat might still feel the way about Hero, but who would you rather have moving forward, Tyler Hero or Kyle Kuzma? And whose drop off do you think has been more dramatic?
The drop. Let me answer your second question first, and then I'll go back to the overall choice. So I think that the biggest drop off is actually Tyler Hero. I think that Kyle Kuzma's drop off has been incremental. In other words, his role has changed so many times because of the dynamic of the roster changing. He went from someone that the Lakers had to depend on to somebody that the Lakers are just basically saying, "Hey, just just do your job, just play your role, right? Just ride with us so we can go get this chip." And then now you have to revisit where the dependency level is for a guy like Kyle Kuzma doesn't have as much of an impact as it probably did some 3 years ago, okay? Whereas with Tyler Hero, all of the expectations came from him exploding onto the scene. And the drop-off to me was just so dramatic because it just didn't look like he was either ready for that space or he was not prepared to play in that space, right? And obviously there's a difference between the two, even though it sounds the same. So the first part of your question, I would take Kyle Kuzma only because with Kyle Kuzma, there is still an eagerness for him to want to be great, and there's still an eagerness for him to prove to people that he was as good as what his first year represents. Now, it's interesting how you brought up the point, Shaw, that he may only be good when it's on a bad basketball team. I'm on the fence about that. Again, I think it depends on what you're asking Kyle Kuzma to give you. When the Lakers needed Kyle Kuzma, they needed a guy to be explosive and to score. And then on top of that, he was a hustle player, right? Like he just had an energy about him. There was like a little bit of like a Mamba mentality in him that's what drew people to him. But as we saw that team got restructured, the importance of what he was giving them didn't seem as important anymore. Whereas with Tyler Hero, this is all of us questioning whether or not he's as damn good as he looked last year. Now, maybe for some people, they can rely on the idea that this was just, sophomoric hijinks, that the sophomore, the sophomoric jinx that happens to some of these guys, and that he can figure out a way to bounce back. But I'll challenge you on this point, though, Shaw. It ain't like the roster is completely changed. It ain't like at the end of the day, Jimmy Butler is still the man. It ain't like Bam Adebayo is his co-captain. If they see that Tyler Hero still has not shown the maturity and has elevated himself to what they thought they got from him in the first year, how long do you think it's going to be before they start calling him out on his BS, right? You're not going to see that with Kyle Kuzma because Kyle Kuzma was already on the outs, right? The moment LeBron James came into the picture, the only thing you were wondering is whether or not Kyle Kuzma is actually going to see playing time. If he's versatile enough to be at the 3 position or maybe playing it, because everybody knew they were still going to go after Anthony Davis. Now, when Anthony Davis came into the picture, now you're sitting there saying, what, is he going to be the shooting guard? You already got 4 of the shooting guards that Vogel is going to play, which are veteran guys. So Kyle Kuzma has now become expendable. Not from a talent perspective, but just from an overall team perspective. And that's why I like to see Kuzma wearing a different uniform, because I don't think he's lost that magic that he showed us that first year that he came in and really wowed people. He's just been swept under the covers because there are more priorities for the Lakers in the way that they want to go about winning a championship. And they just don't see where Kyle Kuzma fits in that picture right now.
Well, I'll say this. Kuzma kind of showed his ass to me, I think, this year with LeBron and AD out. I expected a lot with him to kind of go in here and maybe recapture that first year magic, and really carry the team. And it seemed like the ship had kind of sailed on his role, where he was no longer comfortable kind of being the man and asserting himself on this Lakers team, no matter who was out there. But he was clearly supposed to be the most offensively potent person on the roster. I mean, Schroeder would probably disagree with that, but with LeBron and AD out, and he wasn't able to carry that. So it's funny because I think in hindsight, the way I'm assessing this, Kuzma couldn't go somewhere and even do what Brandon Ingram is doing, and that's somebody who they moved off of, right, too. Like, Kuzma is not as good as Brandon Ingram. I think that's clear. Even if you give Kuzma his own team and his own role, even put Kuzma and replace him with Brandon Ingram, like, you think Kuzma's getting the type of numbers Ingram got with Zion Williamson on the team, he's going to shrink. And that's why I think it's like, it's not a knock, and it sounds extremely negative, but I think it's a matter of understanding who he is and what he can ultimately give you. And sure, he can give you 15 to 16 or whatever the case would be with probably some low level efficiency. But I just don't think he's a piece that you're building a team around. He's a role player who can score the basketball.
Well, it's interesting you ended that point by saying he's a piece that you could build a team around, because I'm more.
He's not a piece. He's not a piece you can.
No, I know. I'm saying. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to change that tenor of the word by not putting "not" in there. What I meant to say is that, in essence, that's not even what my expectation was, to your point, right? Like, I don't expect him to be someone that you're building around. I expect him to be somebody, though, that his role can be reinvigorated, reapplied in a way where it could be effective, given what he had shown his first season. Now, to your point, the bigger question comes into play is, has he been so disenamored with what happened to him because of LeBron James and Anthony Davis consuming that space, that the magic is gone. The thrill is gone with this dude. I'm willing to not believe that's being the case. I wouldn't liken him so much to something that you would compare Brandon Ingram to, as much as I think about with Andrew Wiggins. And unfortunately, I would hate to see his career path trend like the way it's been trending with Andrew Wiggins, because then you're absolutely correct, Shaw. I would buy into the argument that this dude just doesn't have the passion or desire anymore to elevate himself in the same way that he tried to do when he came out in his rookie season. But I'm willing to bet that maybe there is a team that desperately needs a talent like Kuzma to help fill in a serious void that he can certainly come in and do in a simple way, not something that is complicated, not something that gets overhauled. Like, there has to be something that he's learned from the time that he spent playing with Frank Vogel and playing with LeBron and AD that could be of some use to another team that doesn't nearly have the same kind of either talent or the same kind of role players for their roster, that he can help contribute in a different way that we're just not seeing from what he's been doing the last couple of seasons as a Laker.
All right, well, we definitely differ on our assessment of Kuzma and what
but
he
it means that you would take Hero, though. You would take Hero more so than you would take Kuzma, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just even youth more than anything else. Like, Kuzma's 4 years now, Hero's 2. And I was like, all right, well, you have to kind of err on the side of youth and what that could potentially be. I don't necessarily subscribe to where I want to have either one of them. But if you had to give me, put a gun to my head and I had to take one of the two, rather, I would take Hero for sure in this situation.
Let me ask you this question on top of this point, Shaw. Who do you think has the least path of resistance to elevate themselves? Do you think that Kuzma's got it easier, or do you think Hero is going to have it easier?
I think Kuzma technically has it easier because of LeBron and AD, like they're higher level superstars than Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Like Hero technically should be having to do more by virtue of the level of stardom that's within that. But again, it's still about hierarchy, culture, and offense and system. But to me, Kuzma's job should be easier. Hero's and they're also, it's not apples to apples because they don't play the same position. Hero has a little bit more playmaking and ball handling duties than Kuzma will ever have. I don't think Kuzma's ever going to have that anywhere he goes, no matter what, or be expected to be any type of even low level playmaker. So for me, and that's why like it's a kind of a hard question to ask. But ultimately, I think when you're assessing the Lakers and everything that happened to them, you're moving off Kuzma here for a second. It's interesting because I think they got to figure out what they want to do with other role players like Alex Caruso. He's valuable to them defensively, especially. So what happens there? Taylor Horton-Tucker, what happens there? What do you pay him? And get him to stay? And can you integrate him into the offense in a way that makes sense? Maybe reducing KCP's role a little bit. Like, I don't know. Pelinka's got a really, really interesting job to accomplish this offseason. I have no doubt that he will evaluate and do it to the fullest extent of his capabilities here. But I just don't think you can rubber stamp the Lakers back into like even a conference finals next year, barring anything like super drastic and multiple injuries.
Well, the Los Angeles Lakers, again, prided themselves on being one of the best teams defensively last year. They were decent this year, but completely fell off the table in the second half of the season, obviously, when their major pieces went down. Frank Vogel, unfairly, is going to wind up being on the hot seat, and he's got to take them L's. I hope it doesn't constitute him losing his job, but we'll see. I think it really I think it comes down to, how much love does LeBron James truly have for Frank Vogel and what he's doing with this basketball team? And clearly, a lot of that is going to be predicated on the conversations that LeBron James has with Pelinka and the moves that have to be made for them to improve this roster. Los Angeles Lakers, again, team that got into the play-in tournament, got knocked out of the first round, clearly is not clearly a shell of the type of team that they could probably be. But I think to your point, Shaw, which is a very good point, that as good as LeBron James and Anthony Davis will be, even at the nearest of 100%, this team is not constructed for them to make an actual full run to any kind of conference finals, let alone to an NBA finals. So there's definitely going to have to be an overhaul done here. Awesome show. Great conversation all around, brother. I can't help but thinking of how many times I must have buried Schroeder, dug him up and reburied his ass again.
I haven't loved my entire life, but he sounds like you've taken my mantle in terms of my Schroeder hate, bro. That was deep.
I guess I was feeling a little ornery about that. I don't know. It's just something, and it's nothing against Schroeder. I mean, hey man, go for his. There's a reason why he's an NBA basketball player, right? He's a pro professional athlete and stuff. I just do find it a little funny sometimes when some cats, really come out and make it seem like, I'm really all that in a bag of chips. And I'm like, I don't know what the hell you were watching, bro. Like, other people may have something different to think.
I guarantee you it's going to be a worse nightmare. Somehow he's going to find his way to Boston and Kemba Walker maybe swap some sort of sign and trade or swap type of thing. And
it better be before we do it, because we'll do another autopsy. We'll dig up the Celtics and bury their ass again.
I'll be burying myself if the Celtics trade for Dennis Schroeder. I don't really like that dude, but it sounds like you don't like him either. So I don't know what the hell we would be doing.
We're going to be talking about some things with Brad Stevens. Be like, questionable moves already, sir. Questionable moves already. Anyway, we appreciate you and yours for hopping on board with us this week. As always, be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me on Game Face. Lead the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. And be sure to check out our previous episodes and previous Autopsy Reports. We've already been talking about the teams that have been ousted, and we keep it going through the summer. So if you want to catch these and others, be sure to go to www.thebaselinenba.com. For The Baseline, Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. Thanks for hopping on board with us this week, and we'll catch up with you next time.